We are back with another live episode of Bully Ball on the Gold Standard Podcast Network. I'm Jason Aponte, joined as always by Steph Sanchez. Steph, how are you? It was rough not seeing you this entire week, honestly, man.
Man, I missed you, man. And I had FOMO like the entire time. I wish I was there. I know you turning up at night and I was just like, damn. I could have been there, but next year.
Steph, you continue to do incredible work. For anybody that's not aware, Steph's sheet of all of the visits, it's great. If you want to know who the 49ers have been meeting with, where they've met with, and a lot of them have measurables, it's an incredible tool. I used it in reference with the article that I wrote. So Steph continues to do good work even when she's not present during the combine. But I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about that because it got halfway through the week because you know the routine, right? You get up
Mhm.
early,
I know
get
your
down to the
routine.
interviews. Yeah, get to the interviews, do what you got to do, get all your content, go to the on-field stuff, go to your hotel room, then go straight to the night and then do it all over again, right? So it got to about Tuesday or Wednesday where I was like, "Oh God, I'm not gonna make it. Like I'm not gonna make it." And I had this conversation with, I believe I think it was Corey from the Browns, right? And he's like,
Mhm.
"Dude," he was like, "You know the routine, and it's only 1 week." And I was like, "Right." Like, like it's only 1 week of this, right? So I just like kind of like I was like, yeah, it's time to like man up, like and keep going.
You
But
could do
it's
it.
so funny it's so funny to see like Chase tweeting that like guys are vomiting in trash cans on the last
That was
day, and
you,
it's just
wasn't
like
it? It was you.
no, it wasn't. I left Saturday. I left Saturday. I couldn't make it. I could not. I had to get out of there. I left Saturday morning. I came straight here. I potted with Rob. Um, but that would have been me if I would have stayed any longer. But I understand that completely. And Steph, you know good and well what that's like.
Yeah, man, it's
Not the
it's
puking part.
brutal. It's kind of like Vegas in a sense where like you do all your partying like well into the wee hours of the morning and then you need a nap in the day. Like whatever
Right.
nap you can like muster up and I just like it was yeah, last year it was pretty brutal, but yeah, it is just a week. So you kind of, you got to lock in and get the content out. And so, Jay, what can you tell us about, what content you got out of there? I know you like to shake hands and talk to the people out there. So, what'd you kind of learn as it pertains to the 49ers out there?
Well, had a really good conversation with Tarek, who just got promoted. That was really good.
Mm,
In the steakhouse. Didn't know he's a Jersey boy. Point Pleasant, by
nice.
the way. He commutes back and forth. That was really cool. But speaking with him, the question I had was, I look around this steakhouse and I see so many of these coaches that have been promoted from under the 49ers. Like I'm like, there's Coach Mike, there's Slowick, there's this guy, there's this guy. They're all there, and I'm just like, look at all of these people. And I asked him, how is it that you guys are able to sustain this sort of continuity and continue to push out all of these coaches? And the it was so surprising. It just right out of his mouth, he's like John Lynch. He's like John Lynch is the reason that
Yeah.
we're able to bring all this together, almost like the glue, almost like the straw that stirs the drink. I think we have in our minds what roles we believe people play in this office, right? Like, oh, that's a Kyle pick, this is a John pick. But he was effusive with his praise of John Lynch and him being able to hold things together and why everything continues to be so successful and why they're able to promote from within, which is kind of the topic of the show that we're going to be talking about today, because
Mhm.
it does seem like the 49ers are setting themselves up for someone who can be rising through the ranks with KJ Wright. But it was just interesting to hear right away, like not even thinking, just saying John Lynch right off the bat.
Yeah, and that's crazy, but like at the same time, like it's really not surprising because I think a lot of what makes John Lynch a great GM is the fact that he had so many connections from his time playing, from his time in the media. Like his connections go pretty far wide in the NFL and football world. So I think that's given him like an advantage too in being a good GM. And I think yeah, it obviously him just saying that right off the bat is definitely a testament to um how important Lynch is to the org, and I guess it's not exactly very surprising, but someone of Tarek's caliber and where he's at and how he's kind of been moving up the ladder, I think it does say a lot for him to mention Lynch in that regard.
Absolutely, and congratulated him on his success and his new position and everything. And it was cool to find out that he lives about 90 minutes from me. He lives dead in Philly country. That's what South Jersey is. They're Eagles
And
fans. Can't make
invite
it
him to
up.
Yard House, man.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Tarek, if you're watching, love to buy you one of those huge yards, and we'll talk some ball and everything. But commutes from New Jersey to the facility, he's just like me for real. But now let's talk about let's talk about KJ Wright. I think a lot of people don't know what to make of this at this point. Assistant linebacker coach and quality control coach. Steph, what's your overall, well, your first reaction and your overall takeaway from this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think on here like I've really gotten the chance to talk about like the Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley hire. Uh, I think I'll just say out of those two, I think the 49ers are going to want to use Brandon Staley's strengths, like what he is actually good at, not the things he clearly is not, and use that in the building to kind of help the defense, even help Kyle Shanahan. And I think Nick Sorensen, as far as what we know about him, he hasn't been with the 49ers that long, but obviously was part of the Seahawks, overlapped with the Legion of Boom era. So, that says a lot as well. And so it's not a surprise that KJ Wright, coming from that Legion of Boom era, now making a way into coaching, finding his way onto the 49ers. Isn't it great? Like there seems to be a pipeline there now between like Seahawks, Seattle, and now San Francisco. It's kind of weird, but I know Seattle fans are kicking themselves about it, but I kind of dig it. And so, with Wright, I think obviously this is his first stop as, a coach, right? This is his first experience. He had mentioned that, his heart has always kind of been in wanting to get into coaching. So, he has that desire. That's always the first step. I guess like I don't really know how he's going to be as a coach, right? You just look at him as a player and feel like a lot of that can translate over to him teaching the game. And one of the things he mentioned, I believe it was in that announcement video of him saying like he took this job, was that even in team meetings when he was with Seattle, he had control of the clicker, right? Like he was walking through guys, he was walking through plays with the guys, and so I think that already said like he kind of already has that in him. I think it's going to be great for him to step into a linebacker room that's already pretty set. Like you got Fred Warner, you got Greenlaw, and so those two guys right off the bat, especially with Fred, I'm thinking especially will I think it'll be an easy transition to him to get into coaching. One, because I think Fred is just one of those guys. He's like the blueprint of, today's linebackers. And then also, I think he's probably an easy guy to coach. Like there's not much to coach him up on. So I think it's going to be a great transition for Wright. And I think, one of the things I've heard about Sorensen, he's not really like a rah-rah guy. Like, so he's not going to bring the energy that Salah or D'Amico brought, but maybe a KJ Wright possibly could, right? So even though he's going to be coaching the linebackers and he'll be assistant linebacker coach, having some of that energy and having some of that, you know, uh, from the standpoint of having played and not having played like that long ago, like it was pretty recent that he's played. So I think a lot of that energy will show up on the field on game day and in his coaching.
Yeah, and a little bit to this, I love a good revenge narrative, but KJ Wright was interviewed by Seattle, didn't get the job, takes the job with the 49ers. Revenge on your mind. I love it. Let's run with that narrative. But yeah, I think you're right. KJ Wright is one of the smartest guys. If you watch his breakdowns, you can see that he's very intelligent, understands all those things. It does feel like if you were looking to someone to eventually take the reins at defensive coordinator, the 49ers are continuing to stockpile and start from here. He can work his way up. And let's not forget the the equity that a player holds over other players, right? Obviously, not every coach has ever played, but there is times when coaches who have played hold a little bit more weight than a regular coach, right? For instance, like D'Amico, like
Mhm.
Dan Campbell, right? Like you look at those guys and you look at them and you see how they're able to rally their men. A lot of that has to do with like X's and O's at times, but it does have to do with the equity that you've earned by being in the league. Now the same goes for Nick Sorensen,
Mhm.
who's a 10-year vet at safety, by the way. I think that's something that we continue to forget. He also played as well too. And being in the secondary, and then me kind of connecting the dots, Steph, and you just let me know if I'm out of this, out of my mind here a little bit. Me connecting the dots with Sorensen being the person that everybody was floating around at the combine. It was kind of like it was kind of a done deal. It felt like then with everybody asked, Sorensen was the name that kept coming up. So I wasn't surprised when he wound up getting the job. But Sorensen, Bullocks, Merritt, all secondary guys. And then the 49ers start meeting with a bunch of corners. Doesn't it feel like there's going to be a little bit of a transition now to not only guys who can cover, who can coach the secondary? Sorensen's played in the secondary. Perhaps the 49ers turning to a team that's not going to be building from the inside out, but from the outside in. Could be that they're really looking at corners and they want to change their philosophy a little bit. Sure, they're going to bring back some of those defensive linemen. They'll probably add some, but they may start looking at and valuing the corner position because they're going to need guys who can cover better, and they might be changing it from inside out.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. That's one way to look at it. I mean, I think that's why it's always fascinating to see who the 49ers are meeting with, because I think everyone like just kind of draws their own conclusions from it. And that's definitely one possibility. I think another could be, just thinking ahead to the future, and also just thinking from a depth standpoint, and maybe having someone waiting in the wings. And so yeah, it's definitely something they could look at. And Sorensen just coming from that background of, he did coach up, DBs in his time, and also, he's had some hand with the linebackers too, but maybe we do see some of those new wrinkles with this defense. I'm not, I guess in that regard, like, I'm not really sure what to expect, because I know like the one of the biggest things was wanting to continue to have the linebacker group be the nucleus of the team, and how they, run things on the field for the defense. So I would expect that to continue, but who knows? Maybe, they're zigging while the rest of the league is zagging, because defensive lines are getting, or offensive lines, I think, are starting to get better maybe across the NFL, and maybe they don't want to lean on the defensive line as much. So yeah, it's always a possibility that they shore up the DBs.
And obviously, with the Sorensen hire comes Brandon Staley and a little bit of backlash. Shocker. 49ers Twitter overreacting immediately to something without really thinking it through. And the Brandon Staley hire elicits so many strong responses. It's what are we doing? What? He's the assistant head coach. You didn't bat an eye when Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach. By the way, failed Chargers coach as well. You didn't bat an eye when Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach. Now you mean to tell me that Brandon Staley being there is now this liability when you forgot that Anthony Lynn was the head coach? Oh, Steph, bring some sanity to this situation, please, for everyone.
All I've heard about, Brandon Staley is, oh, he's gonna come in and he's gonna ruin everything, and his scheme, his system, like, it's gonna be completely different. And it's like, I don't know where you get that idea from, because like you said, Jay, like, everything that people didn't like about Staley is everything he's not going to be for the
Right.
49ers. So like, I don't, what are we even doing here? Like, and first, like, let's just wait to see what the role is going to be. I think we know for sure, based on like reports, assistant head coach is going to be part of the title. Now, if there's going to be any secondary title, we don't really know quite yet. And as far as what his day-to-day role is going to be, or even his game day role, like, we don't know the details of that yet. I was listening to the Tim K and Matt Barrows podcast, 49ers Plus Minus, after this news broke. And, Barrows kind of thought that, it's possible that we see Staley up in the booth for game days, right? He'll be more of a background kind of guy, and maybe, he helps with the game planning side of things. And definitely someone the 49ers didn't want having, media availability, right? Like maybe that's all part of this. They want to keep him in the background. So again, all of the things that 49er fans are or were worried about with Brandon Staley as a defensive coordinator, that none of that matters, at this point, because he's going to be helping out with different things. And another thing that, one of my subscribers actually like pointed out is that, this could even help Kyle Shanahan, you know, prepare against Vic Fangio type defenses, right? Because he is from the Fangio coaching tree, and Kyle has always kind of struggled against that. So it could even help Kyle in his game and how he calls the offense a little bit better and makes adjustments. So I think, again, the 49ers, just like all of us, I'm sure, know what didn't really work for Brandon Staley, and they're not going to bring him in here to do those things. Like that would be idiotic. So have some faith in the plan. Sorensen is going to be the defensive coordinator. I think ideas will funnel through him and Kyle Shanahan as far as like any new wrinkles, they decide to bring into the defense, because Sorensen and Kyle have a better understanding of the personnel and what, the current personnel would be best fit to run and do and all that. So they're not just going to go ahead and start changing things just because Brandon Staley told them so. Let's just stop with the panic.
The thing is this feels like Sorensen is going to call the plays. Staley is going to be the game planner, because everybody just forgets that when he was a defensive coordinator, he was definitely one of the better game planners. And against personnel, he knew how to match. It wasn't like, hey, this is the scheme we're running, let's just hope it works. It's, okay, this personnel presents this challenge, this is how we're going to knock that out. And another thing that kind of fits so much is the 49ers are one at the top of the league in terms of split safety looks. It's literally what Brandon Staley was running in 2020 when the Rams gave up the least amount of points and the least amount of yards in the league. Keep everything in front of you and make yourself flexible in that way. I don't think this is going to be anywhere near what people think. I think three things can be true about Brandon Staley's time as a Chargers head coach. It was bad. It was real bad. The defense was bad, but the defense was always hurt. And as a head coach, you're not involved in the game planning like that. You have to oversee almost everything else as well, too. You can't be dialed in on the game planning as well. But Joey Bosa's always hurt. Derwin James is always hurt. J.C. Jackson was a bust. The Chargers are a mess from top to bottom. Now, does that mean that Brandon Staley is absolved of any blame? No. But literally, when you're looking at this, everyone says, well, he flamed out as a head coach. Now he doesn't have to do any of that. Now it's just game planning and just being there for defense. He doesn't have to worry about the offense. And much like Anthony Lynn being the assistant head coach, he was there for the run game. He was helping with the running backs. That's his thing. Now with Staley, he's a defensive guy. That's where he'll help. So while they have Sorensen's going to be doing the play calling, Brandon Staley is going to be able to walk him through the game planning and help him along the way. I think this is a great hiring. If you're worried about Staley's time with the Chargers, I would tell you don't, because that's not indicative of what he's going to be towards this team right now and what his role is right now. Forget what happened as a head coach. Some guys aren't head coaches. Some guys are defensive coordinators and coordinators. That's what Brandon Staley is. It is no reason to go ahead and go panic. Brandon Staley is going to have nothing to do with the offense. Brandon Staley is going to have everything to do with helping Nick Sorensen and helping this team game plan, because he is a good defensive game planner. He is from the Vic Fangio tree, and he is running that split safety look that the 49ers run. It's a perfect fit, hand in glove. No need to panic, like at all. No need to panic.
And I think like this is about to be so anticlimactic. Like for all the people who are like panicking about this move and what it might mean for the team. Like you mentioned Anthony Lynn. Us as fans, like we barely even noticed Lynn was there.
People
or
forgot
like
that he was even there. Now all of a sudden the
Exactly.
assistant head coach is the worst thing in the world now. You had no idea that Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach before that. Come on.
Oh man. So yeah, it just cracks me up. But there's always going to be overreaction. And another thing that you kind of mentioned that it kind of reminds me, like the fact that things didn't work out for him as a head coach. There's less of a possibility that he leaves for another team, because like maybe other teams aren't even going to be interested in him in a year's time. So that's another plus. If you can keep another brain that adds value to the building, and you don't have to worry about that person leaving, I mean, that's a pretty good deal. So yeah, I think it's going to work out just fine. And also I think Staley will just help Sorensen, get up to speed quickly on the ins and outs of being a defensive coordinator, because this is Sorensen's first time, being in that role. So he's going to have great support and a great guide in that regard next to him. So yeah, it's a win-win, I think.
My favorite thing is when a defense gives up a big play, I can't wait for Twitter to say, why would Brandon Staley allow this? Why would he do this? Why is this happening? Literally, Nick Sorensen is your defensive coordinator. That's somebody that you should be looking at. But it's just leave it to 49er fans to get, overly worked up over something that nobody remembers, right? Like nobody remembered Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach. It's really not that big of a deal. Okay. Like it's just not. Moving on. So right now, in terms of what the 49ers need, it's pretty clear, but it's March 5th and we still have free agency. So Steph, I want to ask you with everything. And by the way, hold on, before I ask you this, good God, this week has been particularly strange, right? Monday or Tuesday, when we start reporting the 49ers have met with this defensive lineman, the next day, this wide receiver, everyone's yelling, that's not offensive line. Why aren't they? The offensive line didn't get there till Saturday. What do you want us to do? What do you want the 49ers to do? It's just, I understand you want offensive line. I think everyone knows the 49ers need offensive line. But what I was going to ask you, Steph, is if the 49ers are able to address offensive line in free agency, then it becomes that 31st pick becomes flexible and you can do whatever you want. You can take a corner, you can take a wide receiver, you could take, you could trade back, right? Like and get a haul of picks and start to really stockpile. I think right now when we're looking at needs on March 5th, we're just forgetting that free agency is still around the corner and there's still some needs that could be shored up in free agency before the draft, which makes you ultra flexible.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, when it comes to who the 49ers visit or who any team visits at the combine, it's casting a wide net, right? And you're going to look at some names and you're going to be like, wait, the 49ers don't need that. Like, what does this mean? Kind of thing. We saw people like freaking out about what it might mean for Brandon Ayuk and him potentially getting traded because, oh no, the 49ers are looking at first round wide receivers. That could only mean one thing. No, it could mean a variety of different things. And, same thing with, just doing your due diligence. You have to, as scouts, like they need to be prepared for any type of scenario. And I do think, the Ayuk thing, him getting traded to me is very unlikely, but you still gotta, check all of your boxes and do your research on all of these guys because you literally do not know what's going to happen. Deebo Samuel, maybe within the next year or two, could be a guy who it gets released or is on the move for any given reason. Like, I mean, he has a pretty big contract, right? So again, 49ers kind of have to start looking into those things as well. But what free agency does is it allows teams to set up the draft and then what then happens. So the combine, like you're getting all these names, but like really after that is where the team themselves, I think, get a better idea of what then they're going to do come the draft. And so, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. They could look at a couple of different positions and address that in free agency. And I think they'd be smart to do that. I mean, they always do that. And yeah, I mean, that's the expectation. So, as far as like offensive linemen go, there are some names out there. And I think, sometimes the 49ers tend to go with some unsexy names. Like John Feliciano definitely wasn't one of the names we'd probably like regard as one of the, big free agency signings of last season, but we saw how it worked out, right? Like the 49ers are pretty good at finding guys, especially on the offensive line who, maybe haven't been top tier guys, but who they know can work well and fit into their system. So, we can see some of that, maybe some guys who will be more, seen as a depth signing, but can maybe come along and end up starting. So yeah, there's a couple names that from like the top tier guys that definitely is intriguing, but I don't know. When it comes to offensive line, I feel like it's more likely the 49ers again like go with the unsexy names.
Yeah, I would love to see them bring in Onwenu to play guard and move, because then you're not just getting a stopgap lineman, you're getting a guy, and you're gonna have to pay, right? Because he is one of the better names, and we saw today that he wasn't tagged, so he's gonna be a free agent. That would be great because then that really puts you in a spot where you can find yourself one of the tackles right out there. Depends on whether Mims falls. It depends on what you think about. Grant Barton is somebody who played left tackle at Duke, but I think everybody has him pegged as an interior O lineman. But if you can bring in on Wenu, then the Spencer Burford thing. I'm sorry, look, I don't want to give up on guys too early, but I think that that's pretty much like that ship has sailed, just a little bit, right? Like that feels like a bit of a miss. When you're able to shore that up now, you can really hone in on what it is. And for everybody that's like, well, it's got to be first round. I don't know if it has to be first round for this because everyone is agreeing that this is one of the deepest O-line groups in a long time. So that doesn't mean first round it has to be, right? Like it doesn't have to be that. So again, it all depends on how the board lays. A lot of movement has been happening, right? I think we all would have agreed that Kool-Aid wouldn't have been, falling into 22 or later, but that foot injury has people worried, and there was whispers about his effort and things like that. So it kind of changes the board. Chop Robinson was somebody who, the 49ers were mocked and everybody hated it too at defensive line, but it feels like now he's for the streets after what he just put up in terms of his measurables and everything. So everything is fluid right now, right? Like when you're looking at it, it depends. After free agency, we're going to know a lot. We're going to know a lot
Hmm.
about their plans and what the real needs are. I think you're kind of right, Steph. And I think this is what's frustrating to 49ers fans is the fact that they do kind of just find those guys that are replacement level. And then Kyle says, well, I can scheme around that. But then when it comes down to money time, it doesn't work out that way. And I think that's the frustration that fans have is let's invest a little bit more. Like the only real investment is Trent, essentially, right? Like Jake Brendel
Yeah.
was a journeyman that they figured out. Aaron Banks, they invested in the draft, so you feel good about that. Same thing with Burford. And then McKivitz, it's like it's all guys that are replacement level. And if you invest just a little bit more into it, and we all know offensive linemen are not just walking around on the street. There's such a hot commodity, and there's such a hard thing to find that people don't let them go and tend to overpay just to make sure that they lock in certain guys. But I think the frustration is you have these guys that are just they're replacement level players, and then it's Kyle's job to scheme around it. And Kyle just says, "Well, I can get the most out of them." But then we see sometimes in the biggest moments that not work out. So I think that's a lot of fans' frustration right now, and I understand that. I get that part a lot. I would like to see them invest. The two places they don't really invest as much, right? Mooney Ward is the exception, but they always try to find cornerbacks on their own, whether it be in the draft or
Yeah.
just somebody else. And the same thing with offensive line. They invest heavily in the defensive line. We know that for a fact, and they invest heavily in their skill position players all around. But I would like to see them invest a little bit more on the offensive line because we've seen in the biggest moments and usually in 49ers losses, the offensive line break down and a quarterback had to try to make plays after that. So it's going to be interesting to see how they attack this right now, right? Because I think this is what I was talking about earlier with the secondary. Is there a philosophy change? Is there going to be something that changes? Because while you have the sustained success, good words are hard, sustained success, you haven't finished the job. And anytime that you had a chance to finish the job, it has been primarily the offensive line that is kind of cost you. So it's do you keep doing the same thing over and over, or do you try to change something? And I think that's what makes this draft and this free agency so interesting.
Well, I think the former is the definition of insanity, right? Like that's what people say.
Correct.
So they definitely shouldn't try to do that. I think it's intriguing though because there's been a lot of 49ers beat writers, the ones up there like Mike Silver, Tim K, have kind of hinted and it kind of came from something or the way that John Lynch answered a question that they've been hinting that the 49ers could make a big splash move in free agency, right? And so, is that alluding to the 49ers targeting a tackle or another like big money offensive lineman in free agency? Or, would they use that big splash signing on another position. Like we've seen them do it with defensive line last season with Javon Hargrave. I mean, who Jay? Like, if I could ask you, like, if you can pick one splash signing this free agency, like, what position would you look to target? Would it be offensive line? Like, are you liking any of the top names for offensive tackle? I know Tyron Smith, he's not going to be back with the Cowboys. There's a couple of other names as well. Trent Brown. So like, would you tackle or would you look somewhere else?
I love Onwenu. I think that's a move that like really can change the dynamic. But with Tyron Smith, that's so interesting because I think if I'm Tyron Smith, I just sit around until like week 7, week 8, and then sign my deal and go. And that should be for somebody who is a contender all the way
Yeah.
down like the
Yes.
line, you know. And I think the less that he has to play, the better chance you have because Tyron Smith's play isn't bad. He's just injured all the time, right? Like, and that's why Dallas is moving on from him. So you could do the Onwenu thing, and then if you want to get really sneaky, if Tyron Smith is around week 7, week 8, you know, especially if the Colton McKivitz thing isn't rolling, or if you haven't found anybody who can play right tackle right away, that's kind of sneaky for half a season that you can get that type of play from somebody who's a veteran, and somebody who still has a lot in the tank. He's just injured a lot, but if you mitigate that risk by cutting the season in half for him, not even letting him go to training camp or anything like that, almost like, hey man, kick your feet up and go chill, and we'll come back for you like when we start our playoff run. That could be pretty cool. You know, that could be really good. But again, the salary cap is going to dictate a lot of this stuff too, right? So we have the increase, we get the Taylor Swift bump, we get even more money now. But
Mhm.
that means that there's more money for everyone, not just the 49ers. And I think that's what a lot of people are forgetting. So everybody who's going to be bidding, they're going to be bidding with other people that have extra cash laying around. And I think that's something that we're forgetting as well too when it comes to that. So it's right now, it's got to just be offensive line at this point, because I don't remember when there was an offensive lineman out there that could be a difference maker like Onwenu that is still there, right? Like even when Mike McGlinchey was a free agent, he was at the top of that like top free agent list. And now look at what Denver did. Like they went and paid him, and now they're like, man, this McGlinchey guy is not as good as we thought. But that's why offensive line, those guys get overpaid because they're like hot commodity. You need them. Nothing's right if you don't have the offensive line. I think this is the first time that we're looking at it and we're seeing Onwenu like be there, and now you have a chance to sign him. I don't know how this works in terms of the cap. Obviously, a Brandon Ayuk extension will give them more money. A reworking of Debo's contract will give them more money. And then you have 11 draft picks, which is kind of interesting because the 49ers don't need all 11, which
Right.
could necessitate possibly a trade up or something in that. Like that's what makes this whole process so interesting is the 49ers have the luxury now, and that's why John Lynch was so like relaxed during that press conference. No quarterback talk. We've got our quarterback, and now we can just talk about actual first rounders and building this team. But they're so flexible right now; they can do whatever they want. They don't need all 11 picks. Now, does that mean that it goes into a trade for a player? Does that mean that it goes for a trade up in the draft? I don't know, but the possibilities are endless, and I think that's what should be exciting to 49ers fans. But yeah, give me Onwenu and then Tyron Smith. Stay by the phone. Stay by the phone. We'll call you week 8, and we'll get you in here, and we'll get the ball rolling.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, like, yes, the draft, we're expecting the 49ers to be flexible, but even in these coming days when as we get closer to free agency and we start to see all these names kind of pop up and guys getting tagged or guys that aren't going to get tagged and are going to enter free agency, some guys are even getting starting to get released, in these next few days. We're seeing a lot of that today, so that's going to open things up even more so for free agency. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's going to change in these coming days. And I think the 49ers are going to have a number of different options for them. So, yeah, I think it's the best case scenario. If the 49ers do go with their big splash signing being offensive line, that does take some pressure off of going for one in the first round. Now, if they don't go with the big splash signing on offensive line, in free agency, I would still like that first round pick to be used for an offensive lineman, preferably a tackle, in which case, like, yeah, I think they would have to trade up if they want like a day one starting guy. But again, if they do pick up someone in free agency, then they also have the capability of just going with a high ceiling kind of tackle who they can and maybe he's a guard that's converting attack. They can go that route and just go with someone who they can, develop the way they like and learn behind Trent Williams. So yeah, the possibilities are endless, and they seem pretty nice for the 49ers right now. They definitely have the picks to move around if they want. They are also comfortable in trading back in certain spots in later rounds, which we have seen. And they like to use those pretty much roll over picks into the following year. So that's something I would expect we see for the draft too. But yeah, as far as free agency, it should be really fun, as it always is, for the 49ers. And another name, like as far as corner, like they can look at corner in free agency too. I think there's a lot of interesting names. Emmanuel Mosley. Unfortunately, he was just re-signed by the Lions.
Yeah,
Good for him though.
great
But
for
I
him.
know a lot of fans would have been open to bringing him back.
Yeah,
I think K'Wan Williams going to be available, right? He's still
yeah,
out there if 49ers
yes.
want to bring him back.
I
The
think the guy that I look at like in that slot right there, like I would love to see Kenny Moore come over
Yeah.
and play slot for the Niners, because then you kick Demo outside and nobody's been more reliable, I think, than him in the slot. That would be something that's very underrated and not as sexy though, Steph.
But I mean, is it not sexy because it's not like nickel is not seen as a splash thing, but it's
Right.
a thing of need for the 49ers. So like if they can get one that, is starting caliber and is really talented, then yeah, like I would see that as a splash signing. I would see it as sexy because I mean, you could put Lenore back on the outside. And again, we're just talking about it opening up possibilities for the draft as well. So another name the Jags released or plan to release, Darius Williams. As
That's
someone,
crazy.
yeah, because Lori Fitzpatrick, who I had on my podcast, this past off season on Fridays, she's a Jags fan, and she was like, that was our best corner. And
Yeah.
I also asked if he can play slot. He used to play slot, then they moved him outside, so he could do both as well. So that's another name that could be potentially intriguing for the 49ers. And all
Yeah.
that to say, like what I said before, a lot of these names are going to start popping up. Yes, you get the list of free agents that we already know. There's going to be more names added to that list in the coming days, just from people like
Yeah.
teams releasing guys.
Yeah, and Williams was second in the league in pass defenses by who's number one? Mooney Ward. I that one just
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense to me. But hey, uh thanks a lot, Trent Baalke. By the way, Tyron Smith, he is 33, but he played
Yeah.
942 snaps, his highest total since 2018. Again, I think Tyron Smith is going to take his time. Doesn't need to go to training camp. We'll be there, at the end. You pair him with Trent Williams. Now you're talking. He definitely returned to elite form even at 33. Something that, again, I would take a chance on in week 9, week 8 if he's still around. That's somebody that I definitely would love to see. And when you look around and you hear that name, right? Like you hear Darius Williams now. That's crazy because that's somebody who's out there. Another guy, I think, and please guys don't yell at me, is an edge guy. I think Bryce Huff is somebody that the 49ers should take a look at, right? As
Yeah.
well, too, because I
Yep.
think they've kind of been chasing that D4 type since they since they lost him. So you put Huff on the other side with Bosa, Armstead, and Hargrave. I think that's somebody who is kind of flying under the radar, even though right now the NFL.com has him as the 20th best free agent available. So don't yell at me, guys. Again, like they're still going to invest in D line, like they still are, right? Like I just think that the need in the draft now is kind of changing based on the defensive coordinator candidates, who are a lot of secondary guys, and how many corners they actually met with. I think you're starting to see a little bit of shift because the 49ers have tried it one way for a long time, and it's gotten them good, returns, but it hasn't helped them over the top. So maybe they're starting to prioritize that. It's going to be a fun free agency time with all this cap space that's out there now. And for sure, the 49ers are going to work some money around again. Like an Ayuk signing opens up some money, a Debo rework, opens up some money. Obviously, you're kicking the can down the road, and eventually, the bill is going to come. But it gives the 49ers a chance to load this team up even more because Brock Purdy's about to get paid. And I think that's
Mhm.
something that the 49ers have to brace for. And they have to start, like, when you talk about the window's open, but the window to win with a quarterback that doesn't even count as your top 52 picks that's a different window than having a guy that you have to pay. And I think that's what makes this season, I don't want to over dramatize it, but that's what makes this season coming up so pressure packed in terms of trying to win and trying to get it done, because you have to get it done before you have to pay Brock, and you will have to pay Brock, and he's going to get the money he deserves. And then then you really have to make some tough decisions. So it does feel like this is a pivotal offseason. It does feel like this is a pivotal draft, especially because the last two drafts for the 49ers haven't given them many contributors. It's given them guys who have gotten on the field, but not solid contributors that can step right in. The 49ers have to hit in this draft on guys that can help right away and be cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be guys, oh, next year we'll see, or 2 years down the line, we'll see. No, 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 no. Especially when you have pick 31. You got to find guys that can contribute right now, day one, walk in the door and start. And I think that's where they've kind of dropped the ball a little bit these last two drafts in terms of, well, that's going to be a guy in a year or two. Well, let's see. He's a little bit of a
Yeah, yeah.
developmental project. None of these can be developmental projects. None of them. They have to be guys.
Which to an extent, like I understood the rationale then, because it was like, I mean, our starters are set. Like we don't need anyone to start for us right away. So we could bring in someone that we believe can develop into that guy. But there's been guys who they've kind of, thought would develop and haven't so much. So Spencer Burford is kind of an example of that. Nick Zakel's like, is this going to be his year of being a starter? I don't know. So yeah, this just underlines the importance of the 49ers hitting on those picks, because yeah, it's gonna, they're gonna have to start reverting to those guys pretty soon, whether they're good or not. So
Right.
like, yeah, they need to make sure they hit. And I think like another need, and maybe it's a lesser need, right, just because of positional value and all that, and people aren't really talking about, I would say tight end. And I know the 49ers just drafted 2 tight ends last year and they still have
Ooh.
George Kittle. But holy cow, man, like they're losing Ross Dwelly probably, if they don't get an extension done or sign him a 1-year deal, and also Charlie Warner. So both of those guys who are your backups, who they do use as blocking tight ends quite a bit as well. Is Cameron Latu going to be ready? Is Braden Willis going to be ready? Those are still question marks, right? So again, that kind of just underlines that, like, if you're going to make these picks, you got to make sure these guys are ready to go. And so we still have question marks on the guys they drafted last year.
Yeah, I think Warner comes back on a small deal. I
I
wouldn't
it,
worry
yeah.
about that. But I need to find me a job that gives me security like Ross Dwelly. I like it's baffling. It is baffling.
Time.
Not only does he continues to have a job, he just doesn't play. Like it's literally. I know he was hurt this year, but it's insane. It's like, hey, let's bring back Dwelly. It's like, why? Like I never understood.
Is he the Dante Johnson of the
He's
offense?
the Dante Johnson of Ross Dwelly's. Like it doesn't make sense to me. It's crazy because, right, like, you know what I love? Like when I bring up, like, when last year I wanted Will Mallory. I wanted a wide receiver tight end. Well, if you don't block, you can't make the team. Explain Ross Dwelly. Explain Ross Dwelly then. The man's not blocking at all. He's literally that. I'll never understand the thought process of people saying, well, you have to block as a tight end. Do you? Ask Ross Dwelly. I don't think that man's blocked a pad like in any game at all. So it's just, I don't understand. Like, I need job security like that. Rob, sign me to a 7-year, $1 million deal, just like so I can be around and have a job like Ross Dwelly, man. Please. Like, he just continues to find a way to have a job on this roster. I can't explain it. But yeah, the Latu thing and the Braden Willis thing, it's you take 2 of them, and then like Willis at the end of the year got some snaps, but he wasn't very impactful. Latu struggles with the drops. Again, this felt like a red shirt year, but see that it belabors the point that we're talking about. Next year, he should be ready. Robert Beal, next year, he might be ready. Darrell Luter, next year, he might be ready. All these guys that you keep drafting, and then you hope it's next year. You hope they need a year, right? Like, it's just, again, a lot of the people that you have to get right now, they have to be guys that play right away. And you can't wait. You cannot wait at all. And I think that's the reason that it's so dire now, is because of the last 2 drafts. And because the 49ers are just like, hey, we're so loaded everywhere, we can take some developmental guys. It almost reminds me of like when Balky was just like, oh, an ACL and he'll take a year off, draft him. And we'll just wait on him and everything. It's a luxury that you felt like you had, but it's not smart because injuries happen all the time, and you need guys to step in right away. It's almost like you're predicting no injuries for your team. You're not predicting any sort of drop off and play in any of these guys. You do need guys, and you can continue to do that.
And it sucks too, because like in the span of the 49ers being in this like win now window and them being so deep, like they've also had to give up some guys that they did draft or guys who were undrafted free agents that maybe were promising and they went to other teams because 49ers simply did not have a spot for them, right? So they've also lost guys. And so this time there maybe is going to be more turnover in the next 2 years where those guys going to be able to stay on the roster and hopefully those are the guys who turn into something, right? You got to get back to brick by brick. Like, I mean, they got to get back to it. You still have your foundational pieces, but from there, I mean, yeah, they pretty much got to go back to the drawing board.
Whew, Steph, 45 minutes in, I guess it's time to address the elephant in the room.
What's that?
49er legacy draft prospects.
Yeah.
I've got such an unpopular opinion about one of them, and I'm going to voice it.
Do it.
It's not Frank Gore Jr. It's not Luke McCaffrey. It's Brendan Rice.
Me too.
How do I go about this the nice way? Okay. I understand what you guys want, right? The name Rice. He has some splashy plays at USC. You see, you're like, oh, Rice, receiver. You forget that McCaffrey, because it's Christian, his father was a receiver as well, too. Frank Gore's actually pretty good, too. I think he's going to be in the 5th, 6th round. He'll probably be there, maybe undrafted, and the 49ers can, bring him in that way. Brendan Rice is such a stiff route runner. Oh, goodness gracious. And I see he's so stiff up top, and he's not a precise route runner that he's relying on his physicality to win and to get open and to knock guys off. Do you know what that is? You guys want Brendan Rice in the draft? Well, we got Brendan Rice at home. You know what his name is? Juwan Jennings. Now, let me ask you this, Steph.
Jeez.
Juwan Jennings was a 7th round pick. 7th round pick, right? Brendan Rice is predicted to go in the 3rd round. Think about that value. Think about that. A 3rd round pick for a guy that you basically got in the 7th round, does the same things and blocks, right? And blocks very well. I'm not saying Brendan Rice is going to be bad. I see much of the same skill set in Juwan Jennings, and I would not want to put a 3rd round pick like that on somebody that you already have that you drafted in the 7th round. Look, hate's fun, that's fine. Fun's not going to help you build this roster any better. You want to have fun? You had fun last year when you took a kicker with your top 100 pick. That's fun. Okay? Now you need right tackle help when the right tackle was there. DeJuan Jones was on the board. But we all love Jake Booty. You messed around on all these drafts. Do not mess around with fun this time. Mess around with the right players. John Lynch said something that was really important and impactful, I think, in the press conference, in which he said, we just draft good players. And we don't care about perceived outside value. Great. I love that. But come on, man. I watched Brendan Rice at the Senior Bowl run a whip route at the goal line, and it looked like he was stuck in cement. I understand. I think McCaffrey is the better prospect, if you ask me, out of the receivers.
Yeah,
I think he's really good. But Brendan Rice, a 3rd round pick, let somebody else do it. Man. I don't get it. I see a lot of Juwan Jennings in him, and we have Juwan Jennings already. That's it.
I 100% agree with you. I've mentioned it on 49 Carats. I wasn't a huge fan of Rice at the Senior Bowl. I saw the same things you did, Jay. I think for some people there's a bias to him just because of the name, just because of who his dad was, of course. And as far as his size and his body, very similar to Jerry, right? But I just don't see him moving in the same way. And yeah, nothing looked fluid, as far as nothing looked crisp. No, not at all. The first couple of days at the Senior Bowl, he had issues with creating separation, and that was against guys that were, often
mid-level,
smaller than
mid
him.
conference, yeah,
Yeah.
mid conference guys.
Yeah, so really his best day at Senior Bowl was when his dad was there. And even that was like, okay, he's doing what he's supposed to do kind of thing. It wasn't like blowing people out of the water or anything like that. I did really like Luke McCaffrey. I do really like him. I think he's made of the right stuff. Just the fact,
Hmm.
I mean, obviously he falls in line with that family and everything that
Hmm.
they do so well. You could tell it's in the genes with that group. And as far as who's most likely to out of the legacy guys to be drafted by the 49ers, I'm going to say Frank Gore Jr. And I would only
Hmm.
say that because one, Frank Sr. is part of the 49ers staff. They can have a cool moment with that. But also I think, he's probably projected to go late day 3, right? So as far as value, is not bad to take a flyer on someone. I think Luke McCaffrey has raised his stock throughout this process. And also just given his name, like I think he will go earlier than the 49ers, probably willing to invest in another slot corner. Remember, or sorry, slot wide receiver, because remember they did draft Ronnie Bell last year as well. So yeah, I don't see McCaffrey being in the 49ers plans, unfortunately, even though I do, really like his game. But it's fun. It's fun. It's fun to get fans excited about it. Like, if you just mention any of those guys in a tweet, like, you know,
Engagement.
your engagement, man. So
I
it's
just love how,
fun.
like, look, all right, my thing is this. I love watching wide receivers run, right? And you can tell like when guys are creating separation, it's just I don't see any of that, right? Like in USC, it was a lot of things that got him schemed open and a lot of Caleb running around and him just finding himself open, right? And that's the thing is again, I'm not against fun, but you have no this is not the draft to mess around and just say, oh, let's have some
Yeah.
fun this time. Like you've had your fun. It's time to buckle in and get some guys that can contribute right away. And Brendan Rice is going to get drafted by somebody. I wish him nothing but the best, but I wouldn't take a chance on him particularly. And I've even seen some crazy things about him being the wide receiver 1 in this draft class. Marvin Harrison exists. Malik
What?
Neighbors exists. Like
Who
there's
said
there's
that?
tons there's
I'm
there's tons
tired,
of
man.
guys that are much better
I'm
than him. It's like
tired.
don't get wrapped up in the name. That's it. Everyone cries nepotism with Kyle Shanahan, and now here we are, saying that Jerry Rice's son is the next. And you know what's funny? Watching the combine, Jerry Rice was picking him apart. He's like, he's got to drag that back foot. I'm like, my God, man, like, don't do that on national TV. Tell him that on the side. Oh, whatever, man. And Rob's just gonna gas this up or whatever to have everybody come for me. But I gave real analysis as to why I'm not big on him. It has nothing to do
Mhm.
with any of that. The guy, it doesn't create separation. He's not fluid with his route running. He's very stiff and he relies on physicality. That's not going to get you far in the NFL when there's actual dudes in front of you, guys that you wouldn't see at USC or anything like that. I'm sorry, I'm out on the Brendan Rice thing. I'm just out.
And you're definitely not the only person who has that opinion. So, I mean, yeah, you're not the only one. And let's just again, that's one example where, I want the 49ers to focus on offensive line would be the right
Yeah.
move or the right thing to say instead of, bringing in any one of those guys, but especially Rice. But hey, we'll always have Jerry, man. We'll always have Jerry.
Yeah. Yeah.
He looks
100%.
like he could
Like
still go out there and run some routes,
Jerry probably could. I
He's
think
looking
he's he's
great.
definitely
He looks
he's
great.
definitely he's definitely a better route runner right now than his son is. All right, that's enough for the for the show. Make sure you guys follow Steph on Twitter at Steph49K. Follow me on Twitter at Jason Aponte2103. Subscribe to Bully Ball wherever you get your audio podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Bully Ball. To the Gold Standard Podcast Network YouTube. And yeah, Steph, it's been a lot of fun talking with you again. It's good to dive into this off season and we get to look at first round draft picks, man. I think this is a lot of fun.
Finally.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so far in the first draft that it's almost a second, but hey, we're just happy
Right.
we have one.
And we have a at the buzzer super chat. Corey Soto says, "Get the guy who doesn't believe in space and planets. That's a guy with no sky above his head equals no limits." I want to say this. Someone brought up the fact that pigeons aren't real. Have you ever seen a baby pigeon? And my mind almost exploded because being from New York, I've never seen a baby pigeon. I was like, oh my God. It made me really think about it. But hey, these guys, that guy that said he doesn't believe in space or the planets, he's off my draft board. Because you can literally look up and see a planet. Like, you're off my board. You are literally off the board. Like, I don't want to see you at all. But on that note, for Steph, for Jay, we're out of here.
Peace.